All right. Welcome to this panel on governance. I've had brief conversations with all of you, so I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation. I'd like to start with an introduction from each of you, but I'm going to do it with the question. So you introduce and then have a go with the first question. And this is about the frameworks that are set by government in order to drive the security and operational efficiency within maritime ports. So how can those frameworks be used in order to support security and operational issues?
Thank you. Sorry, while John's trying to work that out, as Dr. Mohammed said, my name's Greg. I have 40 years experience in crisis and emergency management as a commander and as a senior leader. I've also had experience working in government department around corporate risk registers, governance, accountability arrangements for a large organisation. And we're a bit passionate, John and I, about what we're going to discuss here this morning in terms of framework. From our perspective, government, whether it's here in Dubai or the UAE or Australia, have a critical role in establishing that foundation, the cornerstone of your arrangements. That's what the framework does. And from that, everything else grows. We know in the private sector, if left alone, the private sector is about making money. And they may not do it ethically, they may not do it with the community in mind, because they've got shareholders to look after. They've got money to make. And that's absolutely the correct position to be. But a framework implemented by government puts those boundaries so that we can then know where we can operate within that boundary, that box. Step outside that box, there can be consequences. And certainly in Australia, as Dr. Mohammed spoke about, the growth in the cruise industry in Australia from 2006 to today is all about government setting that foundation stone, and then from there, the private sector, the cruise industry, was able to evolve and mature. John.
Thank you. John Thomas. I've also had over 40 years experience as a senior officer in government departments related to crisis management, emergency management, as well as experience nationally within the counter-terrorism arrangements there, responsible for policy and also training and development skills for people undertaking those roles. What I would say about the governance systems is that we all live under them, and it doesn't matter what our industry is. We all have government-driven frameworks that guide us in one way or another. With relation to the maritime industry, there are government-driven frameworks that dictate how companies operate and the rules according to the jurisdiction that they're in. But there are also those international rules and regulations that give an impact to the organisation that must adhere to and comply with. And so the maritime industry, being a multinational and international business framework, becomes a complex one. So I look at the governance arrangements as being guidelines within which we operate. And of course, from that, we then have our governance arrangements within organisations that dictate the strategies decision makers in how we fulfil that mission of the organisation.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. I think Dr. Muhammad did a very good introduction, so I'll answer the question quickly. I add to my panelists, of course, I do agree that when we are talking about port operations, we're talking first about international standards, because the moment your ship leaves your country, khalas, it's in international water, so you don't control it really. So we need first to adhere to international standards with safety and security, and everything comes with a package. However, I think, speaking about the UAE, the safety and the security of the port is the safety and the security of the nation. So there's zero compromise, zero tolerance. So the regulatory landscape put in a way where there's some security and security related regulations done at country level. So it's federal level, and then some of them are made at Emirates level. So the local government had some flexibility in governance how will this be managed. However, we always do work hand by hand with the other government entities whenever we change anything or we introduce anything. Even, for example, now Abu Dhabi is working on promoting super yachts to come to Abu Dhabi. All right, so look at strategy and how we can attract more super yachts to come together. The first point that we do is to talk to other government entities to look at how can we, overcome red taping, however, maintain security and safety to the expected levels. How can we work with border securities, with immigrations, with everything? So I think Abu Dhabi, UAE sets really good example in terms of keeping safe and secure ports and nations, and yet giving some sort of operational freedom for ports. So, for example, Abu Dhabi Ports is a listed company started February 2022, which really gives a little bit of flexibility in terms of commercialization and expansion. So, and then what happens inside the ports in terms of security and safety, this comes as a ports regulations normally endorsed by the government.
Yes, I see the level playing field that you'd mentioned, the not avoiding the Wild West and making sure that there is a minimum standard that people follow. But there's also an element of the common language and making sure that all of the companies that are working under that framework are able to interact together. And that's the element of efficiency that is part of what I see. Do you have any examples of how the government framework is driving that efficiency?
Without getting ahead of ourselves, but my presentation after lunch will talk on that very matter, in that from my world in crisis and emergency management, that commonality of language and commonality of approach is crucial, because in having mature systems, in having mature relationships, in having an understanding of your environment, you having an understanding of my environment, actually makes my job easier in terms of resolving an incident in your port or in your port facility, because we're starting at a higher level in the relationship, and that's crucial. And I'll talk about that in the next presentation.
Yeah, if I can add to that as well, the issue of standardisation through frameworks is important. I spoke before and said that they are basically guidelines within which we operate. But the truth is, in an industry, it can provide standardisation that's critical to exactly that, the efficiency of an operation, but it's also the ability of international partners to operate collaboratively also, because it builds trust and it builds confidence in the sector and the organisation itself when they adhere to those standards. Now, from a standards point of view, as an example, if we're talking about risk, there are international standards for risk management, right? So if we stick to those, we know that we're approaching it in the same vein. But there are other standards as well that apply, and the IMO, as an example, has many of these guidelines that once the maritime industry complies with those, then it doesn't matter where in the world that a shipping activity is taking place. We're confident that we're getting similar activity and similar thinking applied to an issue. And that provides a confidence across the board in terms of the shipping owners, the company, the employees, the consumer that has goods on those ships. They have expectations, but those expectations are standardised as well because of those frameworks that do exist.
Dr. I'll start on the next one, but if you want to talk about what so you can have an expansive answer.
Yeah.
So there is some give and take in this. The government doesn't just set the framework. There is a relationship between the industry and government. And I wanted to have a look at this relationship management process between industry and government and how that can help with the continuity of the activities, and also in terms of if there is any critical threats, how that relationship management can help.
Yeah. I'll first comment on the first question. I would like to reflect on the Victorian model. I think one of the challenges now is that we do have different operating models for ports, not only in Australia, but across the world. Previously, you would have the port most probably is a government entity, and they just make sure that the port is open to ensure you're getting the goods in and out. Now, with the changing models across the globe, so for example, in Melbourne, when we do asset recycling like everybody else except Perth, I think, we sold our ports. And we sold the ports with the operations, with the lands for the next 50 years. So what they did in the same day, actually, was privatized. They announced the Port Authority that still doesn't have any operational role within the port, but it does report to the minister, and it does appoint the harbour master. And that was something really important to maintain within the model, because the harbour master, other than daily activities of the port, is the person who will take critical decisions during crisis. For example, I was sitting as part of the state emergency flood management team in September 2022. If you remember, we had flood going down the Yarra and the Maribyrnong River. It was so close to the city, we had to close port operations. And the person in charge who took that decision was the harbour master, given that that person was still a government personnel, had no commercial pressure from the port, and took the decision in the best interest of the operations and the country as well. So this is really sensitive, because even in Abu Dhabi as well, we have our own operating model. So as I said, Abu Dhabi Ports was previously a government-owned company, and then it became a listed company in February 2022. And that helped with the red taping, with improving operations and efficiency and acquisition and international operations. However, we do still look at the regulator impact on the port and how much you can contribute during crisis management. Now, as you see, I work for Abu Dhabi Maritime, but I sit in Abu Dhabi Port. So Abu Dhabi Maritime is an entity delegated by the government of Abu Dhabi to deliver government mandate sitting or managed by Abu Dhabi Ports Group. So this has been going for 3 years. So originally my team sits with the Department of Municipality and Transport. We're we're public servant. The reason why we were put under the port is actually to increase efficiency, because we could see the port model is really successful. They deliver CapEx really quickly. They have a bit the targets that they keep and they exceed and stuff like that. And here we're so critical because we sit under the ports, but we recommend regulations. We're the regulator, we're the enforcer as well. But it's the way it was set through that agreement, it still gives us the flexibility to regulate the sector at large, including ports operations as well.
If I may, it's an excellent point that you make, is the ability of the organisations to influence regulation. And sometimes with government-led frameworks, the belief is that they are trickled down and that there is no ability to influence the nature of these directives. Where you have good relations with the government and the authorities in charge of maritime operations, you are an important element of economic development for the UAE. And as a critical infrastructure, then you carry much weight in terms of the ability to influence the decisions and the manner in which regulations are both derived and also applied. So I think that element of the relationship can't be underrated. It's a strong point to be made with regards to the relationship development. It's a critical role. I do come back to the terminology that I used, critical infrastructure, and ports need to be seen as being that critical infrastructure, because without it there is economic, there is social, there is potentially military impacts that come from not recognising it and for those efficiencies not to be there.
So I'll be quick. I'm going to make a bold statement. I can't necessarily talk about Dubai, but I could certainly talk about Australia, that sometimes our governments don't get it right. They actually have unintended consequences on a policy decision, well intended, but can have a knock-on effect in industry or somewhere. And the relationship management, I can't stress enough. It's a dated example. While Dr. Hayer and John were talking, it took me back to a time in Australia. We hosted the APEC event, Asian Pacific Economic Community. World leaders came into Australia from around the Pacific Rim. It was a major security event, and it was held in Sydney, in New South Wales. The government the government policy at the time, both at the federal and state level, was to shut the city down and actually put fencing to create a security buffer zone to keep the world leaders. Like, we're talking to the President of Russia and America and things like that. And it was a major security operation. And we were shutting the city down for 3 or 4 days. But it was shut down for probably longer than that, because we had to install the security measures and all that. In the photo where you see that ship, that's at the overseas passenger terminal. What's not on the picture is Dixon Road, which is the road where we re-provision, we offload the ship, all the refuse and rubbish gets taken out, and we re-provision the ship. It comes in at 6 a.m. in the morning. At 6 o'clock at night, it's leaving the harbour to go on its next cruise. And the unintended consequence was it was inside the security footprint, and the operation came to a halt. And the company security officer under the arrangements with Princess Cruises reached out to me, and because of the relationship, because of the strong working professional relationship, we're able to go to government and make some significant changes to a security footprint for an international security event, because we had the confidence, the relationship to go forward. We had an agreed position. We worked out how we could do this, and we're able to then re-provision and get those ships running, because government, as part of their planning, really didn't take into account there were going to be ships coming and going while this event was on. It happens. Relationships, I can't stress it enough, the importance of them. Thank you.
Try this one and see what was happening. You know, might be down to one microphone.
That leads us nicely into the next question, which is about these crisis management, business continuity plans for maritime operations. And it sounds like you've what you were discussing would have involved one of these plans and being able to modify it given the situation. What would you say would be the major challenges in implementing these plans and making them work?
Start out.
One of the major challenges faced with this type of planning is actually the context. So as we know, with risk management, context is very important to have that right. But with crisis management planning, I think one of the things that needs to be stated is that crisis management is not done in isolation. The planning is not done in isolation. So as an organisation, we have a number of plans that are in place. As a matter of fact, you may even see plans in your own organisations that sit on a bookshelf, but they can't just sit there. It's one thing to have a plan and tick the box that the plan exists, but they're related to other processes. They're related to business continuity. They're related to the risk management process. They're related to emergency management plans. And of course, all of these come back into your governance systems as well. One of the challenges, of course, is getting it right, getting the connections right. And if you start with assumptions that are wrong, then we're going to end up with conclusions that are wrong. So that is important. The second thing is that the people doing the plans do need to understand the process and how to make the inclusions, and of course the assumptions made from certain data needs to be accurate and the like. One of the problems that people do have with this is the lack of collaboration with peers and in other industry personnel, because they do it in isolation. Yet if you come up with elements of risk and that lead on to business continuity and emergency management planning, that collaboration is really, really important. And the one aside I would say is that quite often maritime companies are rivals. They're in competition with each other, but there are times where they need each other because the complementary systems that they have and the standardisation of some of the frameworks that we spoke about is critical in arriving in a position where they can successfully navigate crises and be back operating quickly. And that, of course, is one of the key elements of those plans, is the recovery aspect of it. If I can just also throw in there that there is an element of training that, and I won't go into training, but there is an element of training that goes along with that. But it's a process. If your processes are also, if they're robust, then it doesn't matter what the crisis is, the framework and the arrangements, structures will help get through that, and it will help that recovery period massively.
I'd like to agree here, because I think regardless where you sit, in what country you are and what crisis you're responding, even if it's just as simple as an oil spill somewhere or water closure or a flood, the main issue is the collaboration and communication. Because what we do, we put our risk management plan in the resting time. We say, okay, everyone will collaborate, and we know that there is complexity of governance everywhere whenever we talk about the maritime. There's the ports, there's the maritime, the environment agencies, the civil defense, the emergencies, national guards, and so on and so forth. And everyone has a responsibility, and everyone claims a right. So dare you respond to something without informing environmental agency, wherever you are. So the issue is that we put these fancy risk management plans, but whenever the risk materialized, we get lost into who's that contact person, are they up to date, has this person handed over, and things like that. We don't actively keep task force for risk management that we ensure whenever the risk materialized, the task force is there to take decision. Because the issue is that you will need to take decisions on spot. There's no time to go through approvals, to check with other people's. The people on this task force are meant to actually take decisions and make to the best interest of the waterways or the maritime. So, and the other problem is, other than collaboration, is technological advancement. Even though they bring a lot of good stuff to us, and we were talking about this in DriftX the other day, we move much slower than this technological advancement. So if you as a port or you as the government entity have adapted to a new technology way to respond to things, and I'm not up to speed, whenever we meet to respond to that risk, we're not talking the same language. So we need to ensure that whatever technology that might come handy in crisis management is being brought across the board, and everyone knows how to use it and now knows how to utilize it through crisis management. Otherwise, it will be another piece of red tape that we have to get through it to make sure that we're making the informed decision.
Which is a great segue. Thanks, Dr. Hay, because I was going to talk about the technology as looking over the horizon, as we need to in the maritime sector in any business. I go back that way, and without talking about particular incidents up here in this region, but there's some geopolitical issues happening, as we know, in the Red Sea and in similar areas. Piracy has been around for as long as any of us can remember. You look through the history books. But the technology now being used by people in that industry, if I can use that term, where they're deploying with motherships, towing out slave ships that they can put their people on. So their reach extends, their capability extends. I read with interest some of the methods of attacking vessels in the Red Sea with vessel-borne IEDs, which John and I, our time in counter-terrorism, we weren't talking about that 10 years ago, 5 years ago. We talk about UAVs in the sky. And from a marine perspective, a security perspective, in responding to countermeasures, there's a lot of material out there on how to deal with piracy and attacks on your ship, but now that it has to mature. It matures by sharing and exchanging information. Yes, we're in competition with each other, but we face the same problem. Now, we go into our region, we've got nation states exercising sovereignty on bodies of water near the Philippines and Vietnam, which is just a powder keg. And maritime operators sort of operate in those areas under sort of testing circumstances. Yes, they're not getting vessel-borne IEDs attacking their boats, but the technology, the challenges faced, can't do it alone, and we must share that information. We must use the technologies, as Dr. Hoyer spoke about, because if we don't respond to it and develop and mature, the people that are attacking, whether it be terrorism or piracy or criminals, are actually advancing ahead of us.
Sorry, may I just also add in there that even from an organisational point of view, as opposed to a state point of view, with regards to crisis and emergency management, exercising plays a large part of the response arrangements. And of course, again, it comes back to the attitude taken by people as to the nature of the exercising. So in other words, is the purpose of the exercise to demonstrate that we have exercised, or is the exercise for the purpose of developing skills and knowledge amongst a workforce that is consistent with the organisational direction and framework? So it becomes an important part. And in that sense, that exercising can be done to give exposure to people in the tasks that they're required to undertake at a period of crisis. But the other side of it also comes when the purpose of the exercise is about validating systems and processes. So there's a more critical eye that is placed across it, and the important element of that becomes the evaluation plan, how it is evaluated, who is evaluating it, and how it's reported. Now, again, if we look at this as a process issue, then the outcomes of that should have an element of risk assessment attached to it, whereby those risks that are identified from those gaps are risk assessed. And of course, what that does also is it gives us an area of prioritisation to those factors, which means that we are distilling information down to where we need to focus, but we're providing guidance along the way that is going to assist us to continuously improve and develop our systems for greater efficiency. So that is one of those elements.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking about if every company had a completely different crisis management plan and there was no integration, then it would be really challenging to work within the port when there was a crisis. The integration is critical, and you don't really see that until you get the training, the exercises to see how these plans are integrating together. And now I liked what you were discussing about technology. There are some technologies that are an advantage, and we need to be using the best technologies within the ports. And there are others which are generating new challenges within each year. And I'd like to turn to one of these that is becoming more and more challenging, cybersecurity, and how it impacts the ports and operations, and the sorts of strategies that can be put in place in order to mitigate these cybersecurity risks.
So probably I'll talk about technologies that might be bringing risk, even though they're bringing a lot of benefits. I think drones and ports have very unique relationships. We use the drones, we go, collect imagings and stuff like that and surveying places within the port, but also drones and ports and ships are not really good friends. I personally am very sensitive when I have drones flying over a body of water. We all see the drone show in Melbourne, Docklands area with the New Year's Eve. You'd see how many drones we lost in the water. So it's always a concern into what if the drones, it's falling down, and if you have people in the water, so you have also have exclusion zones and so on and so forth. But other things also, the radio waves, the security of the port, the security of the operators, and if you have a defense base nearby as well. So there is always a lot of, investigations around the importance of drones integration within ports operations. Now, if you put ports aside and look at, recreational and transportation use of the ports, and as I said, in DriftX the other day, we were looking at cutting-edge technologies for all, mobility sectors. And we have a lot of technological advancement even here in UAE, and transporting people and stuff using drones. And whenever I started to talk about drones going into places with members of the public or over communities, there's always a concern into how are you going to ensure the safety and security of everything. So it's not only about the drone, it's about the drone being unmanned, being over community areas, water areas, and things like that. So I think there's a lot of really great technologies coming with the drones, but also I think drones are one of the things that will need us to adjust our regulatory landscape to fit how they operate, whether we're talking about ports, maritime sector, or recreational, because whether we like it or not, they're coming. They're coming big and small, all shape and size, doing great things. But because it's the area where you come and say, I manage water, then manage aviation, and they come with you with these fancy permits from the aviation departments that I can't fly, but then you think about all the safety and hazards you do around the water. So I'm very open-minded. We were celebrating the other day, but I think we need to have a closer look on our regulation and safety and crisis management when it comes to drones operating around the sensitive water bodies.
Yes, look, cybersecurity, every day we're reading about it in the media. Only today, Qantas, our national carrier in Australia, that reports that an app that we all use to do our bookings and manage our bookings was compromised, and personal data was lost, and flight details were lost. And this is our national carrier. And no doubt, John and mine, our details are out there. And in some respects, I think the community is starting to get a bit sanitised. We've had significant breaches in private health insurance, in our Telstra operators, and it's every day it's something. And marine operations are not immune to these sort of breaches. Port Botany, a large container port in Sydney, was breached in terms of cybersecurity. But Dr. Sue, when you talk about strategies, to me, you've got to have lessons learned. You've got to be a learning organisation, and you've got to accept to a certain degree. You don't have to be comfortable with it, but something may happen within cybersecurity that you're going to be compromised. It's what you do with that afterwards. Do you just ignore it, Control, Alt, Delete, get the system working again and all's fine? Because port operations, it's just-in-time management. Containers have got to come and containers have got to go. The Dubai cruise terminal here, like I read with interest, 38,000 passengers in a day can turn over. It's phenomenal numbers. So, but you've got to have lessons learned if it's compromised, if something happens. And how do you learn from that? How do you improve your systems? You can't sit on your hands just thinking it'll go away. And the work John and I do in businesses, we tend to find that, interestingly enough, that they are happy picking in the cyberspace because they're too busy running the operation. They're too busy making money. They're too busy shifting containers and getting passengers on boats to go, hang on a minute, we need to tighten this up.
I think, and certainly with regards to this, it's very much a part of that whole approach to risk management as well, and the governance, and that is that it's an end-to-end process. It can't be looked at in isolation. It has to be inculcated through your organisation, but also with regards to the outcomes, so identifying it, learning from it, but how are those lessons learnt then reinvested into the organisation? And unfortunately, what we find with some of the Australian companies that we have dealt with is that the approach to risk management, be it cyber or any other type of risk, is quite linear. And that is that we start the process, we undertake the risk assessment, we mitigate the risks, etc. And job's done. But when we have altered the systems, we've altered the context. And so it's a circular process that means we've got to go back and reassess. And it's the consistency and the constancy of that process that needs to be applied in order to ensure that those processes are fit for purpose and that they're achieving the outcomes that we intend them to achieve.
At the university, we are constantly doing cybersecurity awareness courses. It is a real challenge. How do you deal with that in the ports, the raising the awareness of things that are happening?
Actually, this is what I wanted to add is that I'll speak today in the presentation about a leading maritime city, but I'll also talk about the Maritime Hub. And one of the initiatives that we delivered is that we partnered with academics. Really, when we want to create awareness around cybersecurity, academics are the people in the room to deliver that, because the people that you deal with when they deliver your applications and stuff are people who are trained to train you how to use it. So you are the end users. But if you want to understand the background of it and, what it means and how to respond to it, academics are those people to do that. So what we do, we partner with Abu Dhabi Maritime Academy. It's another cluster under Abu Dhabi Ports Group. And we deliver cybersecurity awareness for the maritime sectors within Abu Dhabi. And we also have some research and developments done within the academy as well, looking at industry operators and academic advancements and how we can overcome things like cybersecurity. So we do this for the entire maritime sector, industry partners, but also we do have our internal for our Abu Dhabi Ports Group employees as well in cybersecurity at all levels, personal, professional, and within the group as well. Yeah.
So I want to turn to the issues of change, the issues of how to deal with the things like climate change, the geopolitical tensions, and how operations can adapt. Because there's a whole structure that is built, a whole plans, strategies, and given everyone that's involved, it's a challenge to make that adaptation. So how do you ensure a sustainable development of and security as you adapt these structures?
Yeah, that's a great question. Climate change, for example, I read recently where the Panama Canal was drying up, where the supply of fresh water, well, I must admit I didn't know this myself, but the main water supply to the Panama Canal is drying up, and therefore the Panama Canal is drying up. Like, who would have thought that? And I'm sure going back when they built the Panama Canal, they wouldn't have thought of that, but this will last forever. I turn to the geopolitical up here in this region where large shipping organisations are rerouting boats via Africa, South Africa. It adds 10 to 14 days onto their cruise to avoid the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. There's cost implications, there's time implications, there's delivery implications, customer expectations. And it's about, I know this will be an oxymoron, but it's about being flexible in your relationships, in your operations, whilst at the same time having robust structure that will support that flexibility. And as Dr. Hayes said about your decision-making, in our world, decision-making is time-critical and mission-critical. The things we talk about, Dr. Stephen, with geopolitical and climate change, these are decisions you can make over a period of time. You're not going to get a phone call now to go, oh, we've got to go via Africa. Oh, that's something that's been evolving. So it's about scanning over the horizon, scanning the dynamic operating environment and making those informed decisions early rather than later, and then adjusting to your operating environment.
I think the issue with climate change and adaptability to sustainability, that our industry and other industry, probably our industry, we still think it's a long-term thing. We still think we're not there yet, so we still have time to plan. Unfortunately, we are there, and we need to take decisions and improvements at organization levels, country level, and international levels. So we need to have two things working at the same time. We need to have operational adaptation so that we adapt to these changes, but also, unfortunately, we need regulation and enforcement because a lot of operators won't do it if it's not required by law. And both takes time. So in order to change your regulatory landscape and ensure enforcement and ensure that you have a smooth rollout, it takes a couple of years. And to partner with international peak bodies like International Chamber of Commerce and of Shipping and others, it will take time to join forces. And I know they launched the Green Shipping Hub during COP28, where it's virtual hubs around the globe, really talking about how we can make shipping more greener. And whose responsibility is that? Because no one is putting their hands up and say, I share the ownership of that and I'll make sure shipping is green. So we tend to actually delegate this task to someone else, and then it reaches to no one. So I think things like decision made in COP28 at global level and country level does make a little bit of pressure on us to make changes. And we do have a lot of initiative in the pipeline as Abu Dhabi Ports Group and Abu Dhabi government as well to address the sustainability and climate change issue within the maritime sector.
There's also awareness within the industry, and you can see with the IMO, there are discussion papers, there are initiatives, there have been votes taken with regards to the implementation of systems that are intended to improve the environmental aspects of shipping. One of the great things about this is the collaboration and, again, the interoperability of organisations to willingly go along and listen and be open to change. But again, it requires that collaboration, and a shipping company is not going to take the lead the way, particularly if there's a financial impact to it, because unfortunately, like so many other organisations, part of our governance system is the fact that we look at the financial aspect of decisions that are being made. So to lead the way for others to sort of calmly follow in calm waters is possibly not going to occur. So there needs to be organisations such as the IMO that are leading the way on that. That, however, does not stop regional actors from also collaborating with regards to initiatives within their own region. So, as an example, within the Middle East, there are many shipping organisations that would benefit through open dialogue and the ability to sit down and have a common position with regards to it. Now, I'm not talking about standardisation in this regard, but certainly a commonality of intent. And that's one of the important things, because we have seen, particularly around the issues of global warming, there are differences of opinion on how to tackle the challenges. But as an industry, there probably needs to be some commonality in that regard.
So we're getting towards the end of the panel. I want to give some opportunity for questions from the room. Just to go through the things we've covered. We've looked at the governance and frameworks for operational efficiency. We've looked at relationship management between government and industry. We've talked about the challenges of implementing crisis management plans, the issues of technology and cybersecurity threats, and then this issue of change and climate change and how these plans can change. Any questions in the room? Do we no longer have a room mic?
No, mic is no points. Anyone?
Thank you very much for our great panelists, this great thoughts. My name is Dr. Maged Hanna. Okay, so I would like to add for what Dr. Stephen in the beginning, what he has been mentioned. So I would like to summarizing some keywords. So we had been talking about risk management, governance, crisis management, business continuity, emergency management, recovery, collaboration, and validity. This is some of the keywords has been mentioned. So now I will give a question. It's about 7 parts. So by the way, I'm an academic, but also I'm expert in the field of the risk. So it's like, so it will be direct to again to the areas of risk. So the first one is in practical. It's like, can you, someone of the panelists here like to answer or the question of how you treat data biased into risk assessment. Second one is regarding is how do frequently doing a drill for integration between agencies in regards to crisis management, because crisis is characterized by, it's not happening often, not like when we're identifying a lot of risk and threats. So, and it's a bit more costly and the impact is massively. So second one is about drill and integration between agencies into response. The third one is about the knowledge management and OPA for the risk data. The fourth one is about if you've done any kind in maritime and port simulations, so risk scenarios, simulations of crisis, and creating a different responses depending on the simulations. And we'll add to this point if we integrate AI to that. So the firstly is a simulation with norm risk data to port. So let's say it can be flooding, it can be tourism, it can be any kind of cyber attack. So do need really to close the full port, or I can be closing partial of the port and keep the rest of its operation, because we understand there is a massive impact financially of our responses, and risk is expensive. It's not something we take it lightly. So our decisions making can be lost in one day with billions if I take to decision to close a port. We know there is insurance, there is behind it, there's a lot of things to be treated, but it's like just in this point. Number 5 is the panel is about governance and operation. It's a panel title. But the one is more concerned for me is like I work with different agencies, government and private, and usually is when you talk about security risk, it's very individual department. It's not integrative. We see it all the time. It's everyone is working by itself. It's like as a department. But if you can share with me, it's like from your expertise back in Australia, one of the good examples or case study of you see that the integrative work between all the department in the agency So the first one, it was about the drill between different agencies, but here internally in one agency, how is, have integration between the risk department, security department. I'm talking about, again, critical projects, not let's say construction. So I'm talking about, let's say, maritime or aviations, which is, we all know that security is working in a separate, in isolation, and risk department, again, they work in a different ways. Number 6 is about how we can adapt to be more agile. Risk business continuity is not just a simple one framework to work with. Yes, internationally, we understand all the frameworks, all the processes, the standardization of the risk and business continuity. But how nowadays, as everything surrounding us have evolution, how to can become an agile into our understanding of what it means risk, business continuity, crisis, what can be happen. Finally, the last one is, I'm sorry, it's too much questions. It's like the last one is about how we can integrate the VUCA, not only the pistol, into our calculations. If in a more as again nowadays it's become more using the VUCA more than the pistol, because there is a lot of uncertainty and a lot of ambiguity into what's happening as external of the organization. Thank you.
Thank you. That is certainly a multifaceted question. Look, there are some of those aspects we obviously would be happy to take offline with you, but to have a look at, and very quickly, I know that the responses won't give you the detail that you're looking for, so we're more than happy to talk to you offline as well. First of all, the frequency of drills. When we talk about drills or exercises are really important in the context of risk as well. And as we said, yep, there are a lot of words that go around it, but ultimately it is about validating systems that are in place, because, as I said, if you've got wrong assumptions, then you're going to get wrong outcomes. From a drill perspective, I'm a huge believer that it's about operationalising policy. Now, with regards to that, it's about the alignment of what it is that is being identified through risk assessment through to how it is operationalised and put into practice. So the exercises and the drills themselves, they're very expensive, as you pointed out. As an example, for counter-terrorism in Australia, there is a tiered approach to exercising, which means the jurisdictions can look at their own exercises, but from a national perspective, there is generally only one exercise that is conducted in a year. Now, depending on the nature of that exercise, it may not actually be conducted in a year, but the following year. So Greg and I have both been involved with, as being exercise directors for national multi-jurisdictional, multi-agency exercises that have consumed the entire budget for exercising. And so we get your point there. But these are also very long-term in terms of their planning, and you have to be critically have a good approach to the evaluation of them for them to be value for money. So my answer to the frequency of those drills is they don't have to be conducted all the time, but you probably want to have a documented approach to what your reasoning is behind the frequency of them that is consistent.
Just for the sake of times, I notice Dr. Mohammed is circling, so we're not trying to deflect you because they're great questions. We will certainly, in breaks, talk offline about that, but I'll leave one thing with you for the sake of efficiency, the commitment from top management. A lot of those things you spoke about, commitment from top management.
We are
happy to stay there.
happy.
Okay, with that, I think we bring this panel to a close, and I wish to thank you to the panel experts.
Thank you very much.
And could you carry the chat?
particular